Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us and for sticking around for the last talk. I think we have a great panel today. We're going to be talking about automation on blockchain. So this is a concept some of you might not be familiar with, but hopefully we'll get to that. Before we get started, I do want to introduce all of our panelists. So I'll just introduce you all, and then if you could share, just a couple sentences about your background and what you're working on. So to start us off, we have Mike.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Calvanese. I'm CEO and co-founder of Brink. We are working on decentralized automation, which we're going to talk all about in this panel.
Hey, I'm James, founder of Autonomy Network, and I've been working on the project for most of the year now at this point. Just generally been a DeFi degen for a few years before this, worked on a bunch of crypto projects, but yeah, super obsessed in this space.
Hey guys, I'm Louis from Gelato. We've been around for a while, automating DeFi and everything layer 1, layer 2. Also just promoting and pushing forth the decentralized future of Ethereum applications.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Before we get started, I do want to say I do work with Mike, so I'm on the Brink team, but of course there's going to be no bias here, and I'm going to obviously give everyone the opportunity to answer questions. Just to get started, Louis, do you mind explaining what do you think automation means in this context for folks that might not be familiar?
So, automation is by no means a new thing, right? Like Web 2 is completely automated. Probably everybody uses software as a service applications every day that are completely automated. For me, one way to describe automation is just basically stuff that runs on a server. The only difference with Web 3 is that you can't give away your keys anymore. Like that would break with the core tenets of Web 3, right? Like not your keys, not your crypto. So basically, automation in the context of Web 3 is using servers to automate and improve user experience without requiring the user to give away their keys or their data, basically.
Awesome. And I should add, if anyone of you wants to jump onto any questions, please feel free to do so. Mike, do you want to go ahead and share, could you explain how the network actually is designed to function? I know there are 3 differences in how the mechanics of each product works, and perhaps all of you can touch on that. But Mike, do you want to start and explain Brink?
Sure, yeah. And just to kind of add to what Louis said about just what we're talking about when we say automation, like there is, obviously you mentioned like the non-custodial aspect where, for a Web3 system, it has to be you're not giving up custody of your keys and your funds, but also in the context of these networks, like they are like decentralized and obviously like something that is talked about all the time. Like you could build a non-custodial centralized service, but in the exactly, yeah, that's quite easy to do compared to building a network that is actually truly decentralized, where you have kind of open execution of automation tasks. When we talk about automation networks, we're really talking about decentralized automation networks.
Awesome. James, and do you want to explain how your network functions as well? Or?
Yeah, sure. I think all 3 of us are relatively similar in the sense that there's like a decentralized network of bots, monitoring some source of like requests or tasks, I think you guys call them. And like once these conditions are filled, the request is executed. We try to make it pretty modular so that like once one use case is deployed, for example, like a UniB2 fork, any other UniB2 fork doesn't even need to deploy any contracts. They just need to make a UI change. But yeah, I think generally we all, there's a network of bots monitoring something and like triggering executions in a way that's like trustless or permissionless.
And do you want to briefly share the incentive mechanism there? So just to recap, these bots are constantly monitored to see if they can fulfill the user's signed requirements of what they need to receive, and then what's in it for the actual executor.
Yeah, so in our case, the user pays a bounty to the executing bot. We do it based on gas, so 10 to 30% extra of the gas cost that it took to execute, because obviously they need to compensate the executor. Otherwise, the executor would just be like spending money, which no one's going to do that. Plus this extra 10 to 30% as an incentive. It's basically the same like tokenomics as like Bitcoin transaction fees or ETH transaction fees. The kind of network has this like revenue almost. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. Just when we're talking about like kind of incentives, like ultimately users have to pay fees. So the user does have to pay for the cost of something to be executed. But the way that can be done through these networks is like more abstracted than like just user pays gas directly, which is what we're kind of used to with most dApps. So yeah, I think all three of us are building kind of like an abstraction of that, where the fee is paid potentially in like a different token, not necessarily an ETH, and also would be paid when your order is executed. So that's kind of a really interesting property of these networks.
Gotcha. And I understand Gelato is, of course, the only project with a token right now, and you have plans to incorporate your token for the executor role. Can you speak about that a bit?
Yeah, so we did plan to roll out a token, I think, ever since we started. It just took our time with it. Obviously, we started in 2019. Probably wasn't like the best time for tokens back then. And it was always the plan to basically have it so that executors can permissionlessly join and execute tasks in the system. And while every integration that uses Gelato to automate its functions should be written in a secure way, there's usually still some integrations where there's like a margin for exploit or greedy behavior by the bot. And I think here the token is just the perfect coordination tool for bots to just stake, to prove their reputation and their honesty in the system, and to be punished if they somehow misbehave. In the future, I think it would be ideal if this is also completely automated, but I think up until that point, the Gelato DAO will step in and play this role of the arbitrator basically for bots and govern them and make sure that the ones that are actually misbehaving get slashed. So yeah, I think the token is really key here.
Gotcha, thank you. So I think we've explained to the audience that a user can submit an order and then bots monitor that to see if they can fulfill that, and when they can fulfill that, they execute it. I'd love to get a sense of what you all think are the short-term best use cases for this type of automation. We could just go down the line, starting with Mike.
Sure, yeah. We talk about this all the time, but limit orders and stop-loss orders, I think, there are systems that have been around for a while that do limit orders already. 0x relays, I think SushiSwap has a limit order system they built. But stop-loss orders are not something that's like really common to see DeFi native. I think you guys, Gelato, built some stop-loss order automation, which is really cool, but it's still, I think that's like a big use case that we hear a lot, and then there's obviously others, but I'll let you guys talk about those.
Yeah, I mean, I think the DEX stuff is kind of the obvious first place for everyone. It's just such a high value, high frequency use case that's just like very obviously needed. Not just like limit orders, but stop losses, like ways to prevent impermanent loss, like doing the automatic management in like UniB3, like Gelato's doing. Yeah, I think certainly DEXs, like liquidations are valuable, but like the frequency that happens is just like way less. So I mean, DEXs is 100%. But I think the market is just so big that it's literally not possible for like either one of us to like eat it up independently. I mean, like Gelato had a few months head start, but it's just not like. They haven't even like got into like the Avalanche ecosystem, and like we haven't gone into the Phantom ecosystem. I think the way that this is going to play out like in the DEX space is just like we'll each kind of grab sort of like territories of like blockchains, and like won't even be like competing against each other for like at least like 6 to 12 months, and like after that point we'll probably be competing. But it's just so incredibly early in this space right now that it's basically open season.
Yeah, so in terms of the top use cases that I see, obviously limit orders and so on were a no-brainer from the start. I just sucked using Uniswap in real time, right? That sucks. So I think what we will see like a lot more of is automation between side chains or like layer 1s, layer 2s. Obviously there's like so many like Avalanche, BSC, you name them, right? Like so many of them, and they need to be more seamlessly integrated. So I think that's like the biggest area for automation probably for the next year or so, or maybe even more. So cross-chain automation, and then in general, like a lot of DevOps tasks, like we have so many developers that just want to automate very simple things. Like it's not even B2C. This is like more like, you know, a Circle CI for Web3 or something what we're building here, where you as a developer can come to our PokeMe interface and simply schedule like, you know, cron jobs for, I don't know, calling this function once a day to harvest or calling this function once a day to claim your rewards. We have a lot of these use cases. Someone built a petting service for Aavegotchis. No one saw it coming, but there was like the leader for quite some time on transactions. So yeah, I think it can be extremely simple. Like definitely Gelato had a focus on building extremely complex stuff for quite some time. But we see a lot of value with the really simple, dumb things as well. And actually, that's where a lot of the joy is too. So, yeah. Shout out to Aavegotchi and Gotchi Care.
Awesome. So I think you touched on it a bit, but I think none of you three probably envision the future of automation to be just these conditional orders. So thinking 5 to 10 years out, what do you think these automation platforms will look like? And going a step forward, do you think the average user will be interacting directly with the blockchain on, say, Uniswap, or will they be using an automation platform to handle that? We could start with you, Lewis, and then just work our way back.
Yeah. So I think that, first of all, in the future, I think that most of the financial world, and you know, with NFTs and so on, like a lot other, like more spaces in the web will completely run on smart contracts, wherever they will be deployed. And as such, I think that probably 95% or so of these transactions will not be initiated by a human. It's just like smart contract APIs and so on. They're like programs, and they're programs made for programs. And yeah, basically, for me, it's very clear that in 10 years or so, we will see so many more transactions than today on all of these networks. And I feel like everybody, like either specialists but also normal people, will not send transactions themselves, but rather via their bots, via their bot agents, you might call them, in order to be able to compete or like even like just seize windows of opportunity without being restricted by human slowness or sleep or holidays or whatnot, right? So I think for sure Ethereum should, and that's what we're kind of building, right? Like basically enable users to get access to these advanced technologies like bot software and so on, to be able to really like, you know, trade when the moment is right, to pet their gotchis when the moment is right, and all these things.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think most transactions will be automated. I think like in the long term, kind of like the ideal thing is for dApps to act as like Web 2 like apps where like there's no like signing transactions. Like you just click something and kind of in the background it like automates something, or like makes a transaction, or makes a series of transactions, or sets up some kind of automation. But I think a pretty interesting use case that we are working on at Autonomy is that I think is like very extremely early, and there's basically hardly any market for it right now, but I think is going to grow like massive in the next 5 to 10 years, is like autonomous NFTs and like blockchain gaming and like the whole metaverse area. Which we have something coming out on this pretty soon. But essentially, like NFTs right now are just basically expensive JPEGs, and like they don't do anything. So if you can automate something in the same way that you can automate like a limit order, you can make something autonomous, like able to make its own transactions essentially. So you can have an NFT that like manages its own portfolio or like trades, or I think they're relatively like boring use cases. I think a much more interesting thing would be like relative to whatever the character of the NFT does. But kind of taking it a step further, which I think is a really interesting stuff, is like one of these autonomous NFTs that actually own themselves. So you can think of them like NPCs, like non-playable characters in games. Because like blockchain games right now, there's a reason that they're mostly PvP, and that's because it's basically impossible to have NPCs. Like blockchains are passive, like you need to interact with them. So without any kind of automation solution, that's what you're limited to forever. And I think without an automation solution, like blockchain gaming would just like forever be like lagging behind like traditional games, like from a feature perspective, because like you just can't get that like complexity and like richness that you can with like NPCs. Like a game like Cyberpunk or you know, Skyrim or something would be literally impossible because they're like single player games, like everything's an NPC. But yeah, I think in the long term, this is going to be like much more of a use case. And I think one of the kind of key things that would actually make it better than traditional games, I think is going to cause a phase shift in the next like 5 to 10 years, is like composability aspect. Like NFTs, you can use them in multiple different games, and that's like seeing a bit of use. But I think the key thing is going to be when these NPCs are created and become like widespread. You can interact with the same NPC in multiple different games, and kind of the same way that like CryptoKitties was like it surprised Dapper, the creators, that these cats were used as like a platform, not just as a game. Like people were building like cat hats and cat races and whatever else people built on it. And I think that kind of ability to build is going to lead to these like worlds that are so much more complex than and rich than like a single like game studio can build. Like, I mean, they have maybe hundreds of employees, but like a world that's interacted with and built on by like millions or billions of people is just going to be just like so much further ahead. I think that's going to be something that would allow like blockchain gaming to not just be as good as traditional games, but to really like outperform it. But it's still incredibly early. I think it's definitely going to take a while.
Yeah, so obviously we've seen like massive growth of this industry, like DeFi, NFTs, gaming, like just Web3 in general. It's grown so much just in the past few years. But I think it's like definitely still a growing pie. Like we're just seeing the start of this, and I agree with everything you guys are saying. Like there's just so much potential. Obviously, like we're still early days. I think in terms of like automation, I believe that like all of this activity in the future will flow through on an automation network. It makes more sense like for kind of the end user not to be interfacing directly with a blockchain because of like various technical complexity, the fact that you basically have to be a developer, have some kind of like technical capability in order to interface directly. So yeah, all this volume that we're seeing now, like it's still going to be there and it's going to be growing, but we'll see it like basically abstracted to like various layers further above the stack. Like we have obviously like L2s, but we still need automation on L2s. Like L2s work the same way as L1s in terms of transaction submission and complexity and having to pay a gas cost, etc. So yeah, I think what we're building is almost like a new layer, like a layer 3, more or less. It's like an abstraction that's going to help users interact with DeFi liquidity, gaming, like whatever happens on Web3 in the future that we haven't thought of yet, but we'll see happen. So yeah, very exciting.
Great. And before we transition, I saw there were some questions from the audience, so if there are any you want to prepare, please do so now. But we are obviously at a DAO conference. I wanted to ask you all how you're thinking about building out a DAO model to govern your platforms potentially, and how you're engaging the community. I do want to start with Louis because, of course, you just launched a token, and I wanted just to get your initial thoughts on how having that financial incentive there has either helped the community, maybe brought in some new challenges, how it's changed things overall.
So, I mean, it's definitely still very early. The token is in its infancy. It was launched a month ago. But I would say that I'm very excited about the things that we have been dreaming about and planning forever, and that just weren't possible because we didn't have a token. Like as simple as having bot stake in the network and actually having skin in the game, but also we will obviously have a DAO. We will have a snapshot forum. We will have tons of cool votes. Everything from more like system parameters, fees, and so on, up to general things in the Gelato verse, right? Like, art competitions. We have a lot of designers in the team who do really nice things, so we want to get a whole vibe going. And I think, the token is the right way to get the people in the community engaged. They've been demanding it. So definitely there are some downsides to a token as well. It can be a lot of distraction. There's people that focus on price that, obviously you don't want to spend too much time on that, but yeah, there's also definitely a lot of upsides to it, and looking forward to governing the network and spinning out a DAO to actually take this to the future.
Great. Did either of you want to add your thoughts and potential plans to structure a DAO?
I'm really excited about just DAO treasuries and like funding of open source in a way that's like more or less decentralized. I think a lot of those aren't necessarily decentralized, and there needs to be more work to kind of ensure like true decentralization with that model. But I am excited about that model in general.
Yeah, I think for us it's something like we had like staking planned from day one, and actually it's already in our contracts. It's just we just don't have the token live yet, so it's definitely something that's needed. I think we always specifically wanted it to avoid race conditions where executors are trying to execute the same thing, because without some way of like deciding who can execute what, everyone just tries to execute the same thing, and like you end up in these gas wars, and then like front running, and then people just stop running bots, and then you end up with a really like unrobust network. So it's something we like planned for from the start, that we like 100% are going to do. Like so it's like actually needed in these systems. It's not just for the sake of like governance and everything. But we definitely will plan to we do plan to kind of DAOify over time, especially once the token is launched. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you three so much for sharing more about what you're building. I did see we had one question in the back there.
First of all, thank you so much. It's great to see this kind of layer of more automation and kind of simplifying processes coming also to crypto. Essentially what I get is that to put it in really dumb terms, you're a little bit like the Zapiers and if this then that of crypto. And taking that into account, one of the things that I'm curious about is, where do you see most potential? Do you think it's on the B2B space? Do you think this would be mostly useful for companies who want to automate their assets? Or do you think the B2C space would also get a lot from it? And to follow up on that, do you think that we're going to see kind of a bifurcation of the market with some DAOs focusing on B2B and some DAOs focusing on B2C? Thank you.
So I would say that at Gelato, we are a bit of B2B2C. So, yeah, I mean, there's both sides to it for sure. There's a ton of use cases in both camps. I think at the end of the day, we have decided to really try to do our best to make improve developer experience. It's very hard. Like automation networks are really complex, especially if you want to integrate with them. There's no standardization. A lot of use cases have to be custom integrated in order to work with a bot network like this. And I think as such, the best decision for us was to completely focus on developers first, but the developers that also have good user bases. So at the end of the day, we're always thinking in terms of the end user, what's best for the end user. But the product we're building is geared for or targeted at developers. So I guess B2B if you want.
Yeah, we basically have the same kind of thoughts, and I think it makes more sense when trying to from a biz dev and strategic perspective. If you're kind of B2C, for example, if you're doing limit orders, if you create a DEX with limit orders and stops and whatever, you're essentially competing against all the DEXs, which is just an extremely saturated space. The market's huge, yeah, but you're only going to be able to get so far. There's only so much percent of the market you can take. Whereas if you are going to existing DEXs us and Gelato and I think Brinko, it's possible for cumulatively all of us to theoretically at least eat up 100% of the market, and therefore kind of level up DeFi and kind of allow for all these features. So I think there's definitely a use for B2C, and I'm sure it will continue. It's not going to go away, but most of the volume will be through B2B because users shouldn't need to know that we exist. We're a piece of infrastructure. You shouldn't need to know that we exist in order to use us.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. We think of what we're building as more or less infrastructure. We think about the retail market, institutional market. I think ultimately we're probably going to be an infrastructure layer that developers integrate with to build apps for those users. We do have an app that like a front-end facing application that either could use right now, but like that's just something we're building in the early days. Like ultimately, it's going to depend on the integrations. We are an infrastructure layer, and developers can openly integrate with that. No permission required, and we're hoping to see a lot of that in the future.
Well, thank you all. I know we're running late on time. Do we have time for one more question, or should we wrap it up? We'll wrap it up. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I think we're all headed to the party, so if you have any questions, feel free to tap us on the shoulder there and ask us there. We're happy to chat. Thank you to the DAOist, and thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.